Como Salsa para los Tacos. Chapter 2. Grace Manewitz. To humans, a brand headquarters ought to be a glistening tower of glass located in a major city. To ponies, an antebellum house in Kentucky was a perfect cromulent headquarters, and as such, Grace Manewitz didn't find anything unusual about her new place of employment. Yum Brand Foods wanted corporate diversity, and hiring a pony as an executive secretary was diversity. In time, perhaps she could get promoted, theoretically even rising to the top leadership position like David Gibbs had. Although, Grace had no intention of rising through the ranks. She had gotten her job as a secretary to Jason Scala, Chief Operating Officer, and that was where she intended to stay for her tenure at Yum Foods. She wasn't familiar with Earth corporate culture, but was well aware that offices generally had a herd-like structure, which ran on politics and gossip. And that was a game that she knew how to play. For the most part, it would be less competitive than the Manhattan fashion scene. All she had to do was be good at her job and keep her head down, and not kick anybody unless they really deserved it. Most of the rabble didn't aspire to the job of executive secretary to the COO, which put her a hoof up on her first day, especially as an outside hire. Most of the rabble weren't smart when it came to climbing up the corporate ladder, and in a week she'd have all sorts of insider knowledge. She'd wanted to get in as Julie Messino's secretary, but there weren't any openings in that office. Not yet, anyway. If she played her cards just right, she might manage to wrangle a lateral promotion. Just the same, she wasn't a pony who would look a gift horse in the mouth. Humans had keyboards, which had over 100 buttons, and humans had programs for spreadsheets and computer letters and such. Humans had complicated telephones, and she'd studied them and mastered them. In the name of accessibility, she had gotten an Orbit Touch keyboard and a touchscreen and a stylus, and by the end of the day, she'd mastered all three. On top of that, she'd learned lots of gossip, for her ears only, about the other staff in the office. For the most part, that wasn't what she wanted to learn, but she nodded her head at the right times. Keeping a boss happy was an art form. So was keeping a client happy, but for now that wasn't exactly her job. As the secretary to the COO, there wasn't much that she was barred from knowing. Information was filed away, stored for later. On the outside, she was the very picture of an efficient and thoughtful secretary. She'd got to know the team who worked in their department and praised their good work when the COO didn't. On another hoof, she covered for him when his 3-martini lunch turned into 4, then 5, then the rest of the day off. 2 weeks in, she had enough of a grasp of the job that she could start to ask questions without even raising an eyebrow. Most often, when she was entering data into spreadsheets.
Hey Jason, what's this Star of the West milling?
Oh, he replied absently.
That's where we get the flour. Flour.
She made a mental note. That was a subject to be revisited.
For tortillas?
Yep. Discounting his working lunches, he had a complicated schedule, and she had to juggle what meetings were mandatory, which were good for climbing the corporate ladder, and which should be ignored. With or without a good excuse, it depended on the situation. Golf games were also meetings, and she shut down anybody who thought otherwise. So, he's in a meeting, huh?
Yes, sir. Mr. Scala's in a meeting at the moment.
Wait, he's not on the links? Grace didn't let her voice change, even though she knew full well that he was. He'd even put on his silly golfing clothes before leaving for the day, and instructed her to hold his calls.
Mr. Scala's in a private meeting at the moment. Is there something I can help you with?
Maybe... She kept her ears perked, even though there was only the quiet hiss of an open line, and a very faint hum of background conversation.
Look, you've gotta keep this on the down low, okay? Of course. Our conversation is confidential.
That wasn't entirely true. Obviously, she would give Jason highlights.
So, you've heard about the latest cilantro issue?
She hadn't.
Go on.
It's a supplier issue, Riverside County.
Grace scribbled that on a notepad.
Send me an email, and I'll get it sorted.
It's probably minor, not on the scale of the Kenosha beef recall, but there could be a contamination issue. I thought that he'd want to know before he had to do damage control.
Uh-huh.
She then scribbled down Kenosha beef.
How many stores do you think it could affect?
A couple dozen, maybe up to 100. Do you have access to shipment info?
She did have access to that. It had been very useful already.
Yeah, give me a second. So, what am I looking for?
He told her, and a few ergonomic keyboard slides later, and she had the information that he needed.
Okay, so are you ready for a list of store numbers?
Go ahead. Grace recited off the list, neatly dumping the problem back onto his lap. It was still worth a note to the boss, and another note for herself, and 2 more things for further investigation. Who and what was Kenosha beef, and where exactly did the cilantros come from? She pushed her glasses up her nose and went to work on her computer, now that she had a couple more suppliers' names to explore and see what she could sniff out. She had already learned that Taco Bell had its own headquarters in Irvine, California, where the Louisville office that she was at housed the higher-ups for the parent company. She didn't know if there were any other ponies actually working at Taco Bell's headquarters, but she figured that there probably were. Jason hadn't mentioned it anyways. If Grace had been in charge of the operation, there would have been a pony in Irvine, ideally in a mid-level position, that gave her access to large parts of the building. She hadn't expected to actually get to visit it until Jason told her that he had several meetings that he needed to attend there, and he wanted her to fly out there with him. Yum had a private jet, so instead of visiting Louisville International Airport again, she had gotten to ride out to Bowman Field and got first-class treatments and a direct flight to John Wayne Airport, followed by an executive car ride on Interstate 405, which was hardly enjoyable. She could have trotted along the highway faster than the car was moving. From outside, the headquarters wasn't that impressive. A low-slung building with lots of glass and neat rows of planters and strange white trunk trees out front. It wasn't nearly as appealing as her office in Louisville, except that it was bigger. Inside, it was a different story. The front entrance was lit up with Taco Bell lavender lights, and inside there were signs that showed the restaurant's timeline, along with other corporate memorabilia that she would have liked to get a better look at, but had to keep up with Jason. The back conference room where they set up their territory camp had a view of Interstate 5, which had the same slow-moving traffic as the 405, and the backside of a shopping mall on the other side of a dozen or so lanes of traffic. "There's an old airport on the other side of that mall," Jason said. "They're turning it into a park and subdivision now. I think it was the Marines, and just up that highway is Disneyland."
Really?
If you want, you can go, after our meetings. I'm gonna spend a day at Tussin Ranch and Strawberry Farms, and unless you want to go golfing, I'm sure we can arrange for a car to take you.
It's tempting.
It really was.
Keep your mind on the mission, Grace. I'll think about it, although if you don't mind, my time might be better spent here. Besides, I can learn a lot by walking around and talking to people.
Keep thinking like that, and you'll have my job someday, Jason chuckled. Now, we're gonna be going over financials first. Do you have the printouts? She did have the printouts. Stock prices and dividends, and the end-of-quarter bonuses were, well, completely boring, but too much of her job involved them. True to his word, after 2 days of meetings, Jason went off golfing and gave her free reign of the headquarters. She'd already learned where most things were, but hadn't had a chance to examine them to her satisfaction. She started with the history, learning about Glenn Bell and how he went from selling hot dogs to tacos, and also how he'd franchised the first restaurant in 1964, and only 3 years later had 100 stores. Grace snickered when she found out that one of his early restaurant names had been Taco Tia. That was a bit of information ponies didn't know. From there, Grace visited the social media room. Hundreds of people working at computers, with a big screen showing who was talking about Taco Bell and what they were saying. More to her interest was the test kitchen, an auditorium-like space with rows of seating and a turned-around Taco Bell prep station. Chief Innovation Chef Matthews was working on double-stacked taco variations and let her try one made with black beans and rice. Further on, there was a row of numbered voting booths where people were encouraged to try new menu items. They would be slid through a slot in the wall, and unfortunately for her, there weren't any new items to try. They also had a small gym with treadmills, and just for fun, she cantered on that for a few minutes, long enough to work out some of that stress, but not too long to start sweating. By the time she'd finished, she attracted a small audience. For exercising properly, there was an open area just a short ways down the street, with white trunk trees tied to boxes that she could gallop around in, and she could shower off in the hotel afterwards. Sometimes she attracted a small audience there too, although it was mostly construction workers. At the end of the day, she took a brief pilgrimage to Taco Bell Numero Uno, which was on a trailer in the parking lot. One of the people in the social media room had told her about it and how they'd help save it when it was threatened with being demolished. It didn't look like much, certainly not when she associated Taco Bell with it, but it was the same restaurant in the black and white photos on the timeline. You know what, I'm gonna go and visit a Taco Bell right now. But before I do, let's get on to our groundbreaking donators. Top donators, Dash of Evergreen, Peter Coulthard, J Tinman, and Darkside. CourierCruz CI, Delta Omega, RuneScythe 9852, dospo, Ryanny Dragonwolf, Secret Moon, Tallrascha, The Toilet Snake, Cerberus, Starlight Glimmer, Squiddy Boy, David E. Sanchez, Soul Dragon, Gaggy, Trey, Shadow Drake, Joe Pure C, Alex F, Rainbow Dash, Teal K. Anderson, TV Killer, and John Becker. Thank you all very much for watching this video, and live life to the fullest.